Welcome to Listen Here. Tonight, looking at the music of Mendelssohn. It is joyful, wonderful, sparkling music. And I listened to it today. It just made me smile to remember these incredible performances of Mendelssohn's Midsummer Night's Dream. So with me, of course, is Rafael Payare. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Welcome everybody. One more time, like Marta said, to explore a little bit and have a sneak peek on these wonderful pieces of music, masterpieces, I would say. Yeah.
This certainly is a masterpiece. And Mendelssohn lived in Leipzig. He was born to a very wealthy and important Jewish family. And he lived in 1809 and died at the age of 38 in 1847.
Yeah.
Tragically, because he had so much more to write.
Yeah. It's a pity because he was full of music. I mean, he was clearly a wunderkind. We could talk about his early symphonies that he just used to write because in the evening there were some people coming and they were going to play together. And he writes these 12 amazing symphonies, sometimes a half hour long, and they are really, really fantastic. Before he was 14 or something. It's crazy. It's fantastic. And the ease and natural way of writing, it just reminded me like what Mozart did, that it was just overflowing with music and we just have to put it on a paper and it was going to be like that. This big fan, fantastic.
He was very well educated and also took the kind of grand tour of Europe. And along the way, he wrote symphonies, famously the Italian Symphony, of course, which just absolutely reflects the Italian countryside. But his third symphony is entitled The Scottish. And he just was so evocative and wrote so, it seems effortless. There's nothing effortless about playing Mendelssohn. There's nothing effortless about, but it seems just to have this incredible lyricism and clarity. And in this case, drama, because of course it's based on Shakespeare's text.
Yeah, absolutely. It's wonderful. Always, every time I face Mendelssohn music, it's just surprising how everything comes. And even with the Hebrides or the overture of the Midsummer Night's Dream, I mean, the structure itself and all the different tools that he used, and he puts the orchestra and all the players tiptoeing because everybody have to be at the point of the chair because it's really, really challenging. And at the same time, it has to sound just seamless and natural, like drinking water. It's phenomenal, really. Yeah.
And so exposed for the players.
Yeah.
So tonight is an interesting treatment of this. This was your second week as music director that we had these performances of the incidental music. And we will hear from Jared McBurney, who not only is our creative consultant, but also created this marriage, as it were, of the original text of Shakespeare and the score of Mendelssohn. It wasn't necessarily conceived by Mendelssohn that it would go in this way, but his work is very linked to the play itself, to the theater itself. And Jared explains that beautifully. And then we'll also hear a little bit about the production, but we'll get to that in a moment. Mendelssohn, there is familiar music. It's perhaps one of the parts of it are some of the most familiar music, orchestral music ever. And so it's wonderful to hear it in its original intention and setting. And you did a brilliant job, you and the orchestra. Sounded wonderful. So why don't we get started?
Mendelssohn's music for The Midsummer Night's Dream is probably the most famous piece of theatre music, music for a stage production. And yet its origins are slightly curious. As many music lovers know, Mendelssohn, when he was still a teenager, wrote one of his greatest masterpieces, which is the overture to Midsummer Night's Dream, which he wrote for a family concert in that most bizarre of Berlin homes where they thought nothing of putting on masterpieces week after week for their own family entertainment. And he wrote this piece, and it was immediately recognized as astonishingly original and an orchestral masterpiece. And it was the piece that made his name, even though he was already known as a wunderkind. And it was very quickly taken up and played and became a concert favorite, not least because it depicts the characters of Shakespeare's play in ways that had never really been thought of musically, I suppose, before. But it was never intended to be a theatre piece. It was intended to be a kind of scrapbook of favourite ideas that had struck the young Mendelssohn. And we have to remember that this was the period, the 1820s, was the heyday of German fascination with Shakespeare, a fascination which went back to the 18th century and had a huge influence on the Romantics, the early Romantics, long before Mendelssohn. People like Goethe and Schiller were very, very influenced by their discovery of Shakespeare, whom they discovered in German translation. That music was very, very famous. And about 20 years later, when Mendelssohn was an internationally known composer, the King of Prussia put on a performance of the play in German with all the best actors in Germany at the time, because it was a royal command performance, and he put it on in a little palace theatre that he'd had built for his own amusement. And he knew Mendelssohn, and so he commanded Mendelssohn to take the ideas, the tunes from his overture of 20 years before and spin them out into theatre music. This was also a period when people were still very interested in melodrama. Melodrama was a bit out of fashion by the time Mendelssohn wrote this piece, but melodrama was still used, and it seems that the king asked Mendelssohn to provide melodramas for certain of the scenes in the play, and he was particularly interested in having melodramas for all the scenes where there were fairy happenings. And it's perhaps worth saying something about melodramas, because that's a word with two meanings. It means, of course, a style of theatre when we talk about something being very melodramatic, but it also is a technical term for a way of combining words, spoken words, and music, where words and music alternate, or actors speak on top of music. The music as theatre music was so successful that it went all over the world, and for decades in the later 19th and early 20th century, if they could possibly avoid it, nobody put on Midsummer Night's Dream without hiring an orchestra and singers and using nearly all or all of the Mendelssohn music. And the Mendelssohn music became sort of fixed to the play. And then in the mid-20th century, when the language of theatre changed completely and all sorts of modernist ideas came in, and also it was ridiculous. You couldn't possibly have an orchestra anymore. It's much too expensive in the theatre. So people suddenly stopped doing the original score with the play. And after that, this magical, wonderful score that everybody loves so much was almost never played. Classical conductors and promoters and orchestras wanted to do as much of the music as they could, but it's not very easy to do the melodramas, because the melodramas are extremely precise in their connection to the original Shakespeare text. Mendelssohn was not only a very fine painter and a composer of genius, he was also an extremely literary and literate man. And it was his cut-up of the text which makes it absolutely clear when you look at his score precisely which lines in Shakespeare's text are associated with different musical gestures, that makes the melodramas so magical. But what has tended to happen over the last 50 years is that people say, oh, we haven't really got time to do the words, so we'll cut half of the melodramas and we'll have just one actor standing there doing some famous lines from the play or whatever. And one day I received a telephone call from a colleague of Rafael's and a very close friend of mine, Vladimir Yurovsky. He was planning to do the complete score in Lucerne. And he telephoned me and said, this is garbage what they're doing with it. You love working with words and music. Can you think of a way of doing it? And I said, well, to me, the most important thing is to have short passages of text between the movements that move the story on, that are sufficiently famous that everybody in the audience will know where they are in the story, that they've gone into the forest or that the lovers have met or whatever it is that has happened. But not so much that it becomes impossible to listen to, and we concentrate on the music. And the second thing I said is we must make sure that the text that is inside the melodramas, where the actors are speaking with the music, is really precise and really reflects exactly what Mendelssohn wanted. So we made a show for Lucerne, and then Calais, my friend Isaac Thompson, who's now head of programming at the New York Philharmonic, he got hold of Mike and me and said, can you make a version of it with lots of actors for the Cincinnati May Festival? And can Mike make beautiful images so it really feels theatrical? And at that point, we let our imaginations fly and took the show to a whole new level.
Back in October 2019, we had this fantastic opportunity to remount the semi-stage production of Midsummer Night's Dream that Jared and Mike had originally done for Cincinnati May Festival. And what was really fascinating was, as a symphony orchestra, we rehearse with music and conductors and guest soloists. But this is a really unique opportunity to bring in different art forms, scenic arts, actors like Jonathan, and also to combine it together with music and be able to recreate for the audience maybe a version of what it would have been like in 19th century Germany for Mendelssohn and his audience.
There are so many details in the Mendelssohn score that are precisely aligned with the play, but one detail in particular people wouldn't understand unless they see it in a theatrical context. The original overture to Midsummer Night's Dream begins with the most violent and cruel musical gesture in the whole of classical music, which is asking two flutes to come in on a third in tune without having played a note before. And as I'm sure Rafael will support me, this is when orchestral players take beta blockers and inject themselves before going on. It is almost impossible to get those notes in tune. If you look at how Mendelssohn developed those chords and used them, it's clear they are actually a symbol. They represent the moon. because Mendelssohn was captivated by the fact that all the way through the play, Shakespeare plays with the idea of the moon, with lunacy, with the moon as purity, as a symbol of love, of redemption, of nature, of timelessness. And you hear how he brings the moon music back every time the words are talking about the moon. You hear it again. And at the very, very end of the whole score, the moon returns. And it's almost as though he's encased this whole world in a symbol of everything that's beautiful and eternal and lovable about these human beings whose lives he's described. Then the music to me takes on a whole different sense. It becomes much more theatrical.
You know, when we're in a concert hall, it kind of removes us a little bit from the original context of what Mendelssohn had in mind, in knowing that this was going to be something that would be performed with a theatrical context in mind. So what I can do to help contribute by, you know, having imagery and landing us into a space that has that sort of darkness. And we take a big journey throughout this piece from one evening to the next morning. And it's this long arc lit entirely by the moon throughout. Just sometimes it peeks behind leaves and comes back out. For me, the journey of that was an exercise in subtlety of trying to find ways to have the colors shift slightly from where we go to the crepuscule in the evening into the middle of the night to the morning, and also sort of the interplay between how the fairy world and the human world collide and then completely merge into one.
To me, it was just a fascinating glimpse into a world that I, as an administrator, don't usually spend much time in. The world of theater and the process of combining many different art forms together to form a whole. And I'm always fascinated sitting through rehearsal thinking, oh, music is only one part of it. How does that interact with my scenic design? How does that interact with the work of the actors? How does that interact with timing? And I'm wondering for you, Rafael, you know, we're so used to rehearsing concerts. What was it like for you to be part of essentially a theatrical production?
Yeah, well, I mean, the idea was to try to bring the audience this exactly what you just said, that we're a symphony orchestra, yes, but there are many things that we maybe from different circumstances we do not have time to explore, and being able to have Jonathan and have Gerard and Mike all together. I mean, because we have been even though for Mike and Jonathan was my collaboration with them, with Gerard we've been talking all the time, we are like a team, and it's nice that we could actually put everything all together for the audience to actually enjoy what we do, and we could actually dream and make these wonderful things. It is, for this production in particular, it's a mixture between being in an opera pit and actually being in a concert form, and it is one of those things that it just feels very natural. The music is fantastic, it's phenomenal. The speaking and the acting from Jonathan and all of the colleagues, it was so great. And it was great to have this kind of interaction, Jonathan coming in and out and touching the players and getting into here and fading away and then coming back. So we feel that everybody, not only on the stage, but at the whole concert hall, the whole thing, we are part of this. It's not this, we are the performers and this is, you are supposed to be listening. No, but everybody comes together.
And now they never meet in grove or green, by fountain clear or in spangled starlight sheen, but they do square, that all their elves, for fear, creep into acorn cups and hide them there. I think a lot of what Rafael was just saying was so moving and meaningful to me, because it mirrored my experience so closely. And I think it also goes to Jared's conception of everything being collaborative, and that this involves an openness in a space that isn't traditionally seen as being open anymore. A lot of this is seen, like, we go to this symphony to hear something that we've heard 1,000 times before in the same exact way, and this was not that. And I think it speaks to Raphael's creativity and his collaboration with both the orchestra, who are not used to this either, and actors and designers, like to be able to feel the physical might of the orchestra while speaking Shakespeare. there's nothing like that. That orchestra and the physical presence of it too. Like I love going around and being able to have fun and play with it, but just the sound up there is so intense. And I like to look at myself and the role that Puck plays as a way of bridging the fourth wall, so that I can like come in through the audience and up and be like bring the audience on the stage with me. As Puck is always talking to the audience in his speeches, and can also talk to the orchestra and be the conduit between the two.
Well, I'd like to say that without Jonathan as Puck, it would have been very, very difficult, because Jonathan is not only one of the naughtiest men I know, but a titan. He's a composer, he's a pianist, he plays goodness knows how many other instruments, he sings, he leads ensembles, and in theatre shows he writes words, he's a script writer, he directs, as far as I know, he flies jet aircraft as well, probably. But for me, the magic of this score, apart from the obvious greatness of the major movements like the overture and the nocturne and so on, the scherzo and the wedding march, of course, the wedding march. How fascinating is it to hear the wedding march, which gets played so often, in the real context to which it belongs.
And at a proper tempo.
Right? I mean, it's like, guys, this has been, slaughtered for so many years. That is not the tempo. We really have to go for it. It's a different thing. It's like, yeah.
We're getting married. It's happy.
Right. It really makes sense in the play. It's like, okay, everyone's gone through the forest, all your magic potions and magic and mischief and mayhem, and now everything's going to be okay. Daybreak's coming. We're getting married. It's like,
it's also comical as well when you hear the wedding march in its dramatic context. It's hilarious because he's setting up the ridiculous character of Theseus, who's a comic figure. He's a figure of authority, but he's like a figure out of a satire or something, especially in Mendelssohn's conception of him.
I'm particularly attracted to that because I acted in my high school production of Midsummer Night's Dream. I was one of the mechanicals. I was the moon. I was toting a dog around and a lantern, and I was the moon. But Midsummer Night's Dream it's a comedy, and in the sense of course, that everything ends well. As Puck says at the end, all shall be well. And there's a marriage, but there's also a lot of just slapstick humor and visual gags in it. But I also love the fact that in Mendelssohn's music, you can hear the comedy of Shakespeare. You can hear the mechanicals bumbling around. And it's fascinating to me that comedy is not the first thing people think of when they think classical music. So I wanted to ask you, Rafael, what is it like for you enacting comedy in this music?
I have to say that it's so well written that you have to actually have a talent to destroy it, not to come across in the way that it actually is. I mean, it is so great. I mean, Mendelssohn, like, of course, if you could have Rossini and this other thing that they were always doing comedy in the operas and opera buffa and this whole thing, but for Mendelssohn, the way he just put very wisely how he chose the text, that is hilarious, is wonderful, but at the same time you could see and picture the mechanics and the craziness. I mean, come on, having the guy becoming a donkey, having an ass on his head, is already just with reading it without even putting any kind of image is hilarious. And then you hear it even for the strings, how he put it, the music, beep, beep, and then you hear it with the orchestra. It's great. I'm also a Mendelssohn fan, so I can't help myself but feel joy and feel completely overjoyed by it. Yeah.
Jonathan, one of my favorite moments in our production was when Puck is there towards the end of the play, restoring things, making things better, well again, fixing things, and he's there to take away the donkey's head, and you sort of just twist it off like a Coke bottle screw top. And I was rewatching that scene again recently, and I just cracked up. And I'm wondering for you, how did you figure out that bit of comedy?
I think like with everything, it's just trying to figure out what's funny about what's in front of you. You know, like that's the like use the thing that was there. If it had been a different kind of head, that wouldn't have worked in that way. You know, I I had an idea that it would like be hard to take it off, or maybe it would be magical to take it off, and we just like experiment and see what works, see what gets a laugh, you know. That and like the panic of knowing that this has to happen, and hopefully it will be funny, and if it's not, it's like my fault.
No pressure, not at
It's
all.
like the pressure and neurosis that forces me to do something crazy. Maybe that's the answer.
But going back to the melodramas, people do in concerts, they do suites of the big movements. But it's the melodramas, and particularly the melodramas complete, that we so rarely hear. And it was actually Mike's idea to invite Jonathan to do that part. And it was completely right, because to me, you need somebody who is a musician, a composer, an inventor of words, to be able to feel and play with, as Rafael was talking about before, the very difficult interweaving of sound and music, because you have a text which is a masterpiece and you have a musical score which is a masterpiece, but you have the conductor, the musicians, and the actor and his colleagues trying to find the exact timing. And what I love about the rehearsal is you rehearse it maybe with a piano and all of that kind of stuff. But it's when you get in there with the orchestra, and the orchestra goes, oh my God, we've got to have an actor speaking on stage with us. I'm not used to this. This is terrible. Why aren't they listening to me? And the actor, I've done these shows in the past, and the actor goes, why does the orchestra keep interrupting? I was speaking.
Yeah.
So what I loved about this week is something that I know you care a lot about, and that is that every concert doesn't have to look the same, and that when these different art forms, theater, projections, therefore visual art and music come together, it really literally creates a magical experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was just the second week, so it was remember when we were talking, I think maybe in Berlin, that we were putting this program together and how we were going to map the season. We wanted to bring on with this audience to many different things that they could experience and being embraced and submerged into this, like as you just said, magical world, and seeing a little bit of the images. I mean, from the outside, I couldn't see it, from where I was on the stage, I was conducting, of course, but seeing from the outside is so beautiful, because you feel really like you are getting into a different world for a moment. For a couple of hours, you are, cutting everything that is outside, and then you just submerge in this beauty, fantastic music, great acting, fantastic speech. I mean, it's good, and that's why we like to do what we do. So that's why we have so much fun when we start programming and thinking and dreaming what to do with the orchestra and where to take the audience to. So yeah.
As you would say, when we go a little crazy.
Yeah. Maybe even a little bit more than a little.
Well, first of all, we had great people to work with. And I have to say, the orchestra responded so enthusiastically. They said, we should do more of this. And tonight we get to see Mike Tutai, who's usually behind the scenes, but he's come now twice to San Diego, and he has this ability to kind of map the back wall and create really a set, a dramaturgical set. And then, of course, beautiful lighting of the hall. The hall is a very evocative 1929 year-old building that was intended to be a movie palace, and yet it has this sort of romanticism and exoticism that the lighting just brought out, and then this crystalline music making, plus the actors. And we talk a little bit about the fourth wall, and here in San Diego, we're building a new outdoor site that is also evocative. And I know you've got a lot of really interesting ideas about that as well, and kind of breaking down that connection between audience and stage, and having the drama and the music and the theater bridge that gap.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, seeing what Mike can do with the back part of our beautiful hall at Copley, I cannot imagine what he's going to do when we get the shell ready, with everything that it could be actually happening not only behind the orchestra but outside the shell, and it could be actually taken into the audience. I mean, I'm just eager that it starts already, that we could just pass and we could bring the audience there and enjoy these beautiful surroundings. Are ridiculous that it's the San Diego weather that of course everybody here knows it, but I come from the outside, and it's just fantastic to experience, even though today is a little hot, but it's fantastic to be like that.
I think also for the actors, you'll hear Jonathan say that over and over again, for all of the actors to suddenly be on stage with the kind of physical and reverberant power of a symphony orchestra is something they've never experienced. And I think it just in the rehearsals, you can see as they're kind of playing with it, but then the performance comes, and there is just an energy. I can't imagine. I've never stood on the stage in the middle of it. I can only witness from my seat, but being in the midst of it, there's just a kinetic energy, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, and it changes all the time. And as you just mentioned, I mean, in rehearsals, you play around, you are trying to put some things together, you try to map it out, but the thing what it happens in performances, they are unique, they are all the time, and they're going to be changing, and you have this synergy, and you could even experience, like Jonathan said and speaks about it, then you get the reaction from the audience, and you feed with that kind of energy as well, and it's just wonderful. That's why I miss it so much, since for have been 5 months already that we cannot have that.
Yeah. And I think the hall worked so well, the playfulness and Puck coming running up through the audience, and kind of tapping people on the head and then emerging on the stage. It was really wonderful, and we're going to do more of this.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So let's continue our exploration.
I see the play that comes from collaboration as absolutely crucial to the whole experience, because in a way, all music that we make should be that playful, and all combination of visual elements and sound elements should be that playful. And Jonathan and Mike will start laughing now, because they remember how when we first rehearsed it, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I was just making it up as I went along. But that's absolutely right, as it should be. I mean, the three of us were chipping in with ideas all the time. And then we worked with the conductor, and the conductor says, no, why don't we do it like this? And I'm going to be really pretentious. That's real art. That's where the art comes alive, because it's like kids playing in a sandbox. And also, as Rafael was saying, you can rehearse it as much as you want, but you go out there on the night and it's totally different.
I mean, that kind of interaction is just wonderful, an absolute joy. And it's the rehearsal process could be, especially when we do not have a lot of time, like, okay, we have to be that could be a little bit stressful, but it's totally worth it. I mean, at the end of the thing, it's like, okay, it's going to be okay. We'll just go and push through, and then at the end of the thing, you could be like, yes, we did it. When we can do it again,
One of the things that I find about this art form that is so powerful, and why I love working with Mike on the many shows we've done together, is when you say to the audience, you have to use not only your ears, you have to use your eyes. Somehow the experience becomes, yes, on one level, it's TMI, too much information. They've got to understand these beautiful but quite complex words by Shakespeare. They've got to look at the moon, the forest, the castle, all of these things, the flowing water, and they've got to listen to this beautiful music. But it seems to me that it's like triangulation in the theatre. If you have the music here, Shakespeare's words there, and the beautiful scenic design that's in constant movement, in the end, what happens is that the audience has to surrender. They have to stop going, yeah, I remember what happens here is blah, blah, blah. No, they just allow this combination of what we see with our eyes and two very different things that we hear, because listening to speech and listening to music are completely different physical activities. They actually happen in different parts of the brain. And what it does is it sensualizes the experience and makes it instinctive in a completely different way. And I get to the end of Midsummer Night's Dream and I go, that's fantastic. Now try listening to a Beethoven string quartet in the same way. Look at Elisa Weilerstein playing the cello. Look at what she does with her fingers. Look at the artistry of the instrument itself. Look at the when you hear those flute notes, look at the players as they're raising their instruments. What do they do with their bodies when they take the breath in? And I find that if you get that balance right, then we become like children again. And that to me is completely magical.
Yeah. And to go to your point about how the audience engages with this and how this gives them the invitation to engage, when you said earlier about this, the best form of art is that which is this sort of collaboration and this sort of this sandbox and this place where playfulness and joy is really experienced. In the best case version of this, the audience are as much collaborators as all of the performers, all of the designers, all of the musicians. The entire room is the space, and to be an audience member is to collaborate in that artistic event. And thinking about the two different spaces that we worked on this, we had worked at this in Cincinnati, and it wasn't in Music Hall, it was at the Taft Theater while Music Hall was being renovated. We have limitations in all spaces, but there was a literal flatness. It was a narrow but long surface on which I got to project images and indeed text to do translations during the piece. But when we got to San Diego, there's a whole way that the shape of the space with the back wall and then the sort of sides kind of creating a box or a sort of more of a surround around the orchestra, where I was able to help contribute to making that a little bit more of an inclusive space. And then we worked with an amazing lighting designer, Amanda, who helped us then take that out into the actual hall itself, because there's all these colored LED lights that then would match with the colors that I was doing, and she was able to isolate everybody on stage and color, and the space felt complete and it felt connected. And in the best form of collaboration, as far as I'm concerned, is you don't see the seams. There's no, you don't see where the projections end, the lighting ends, and the scenic ends, and the architecture begins. And the way that the actors and the audience were bridged. If I'm looking for ways of taking that seam and blurring the threads, the breaking of the fourth wall with Jonathan and with the orchestra and the actors into the audience, that the blurring of those threads also made it feel like everything was just completely just a room where everybody was playing.
I'd like to say something else also about Amanda's lighting. There is something fascinating about lighting an orchestra in such a way that the bodies of the players become part of the theatre, that playing music becomes theatrical, so that when the violins all lift their bows or you see their fingers going like this, it glitters like the leaves in the forest or like water flowing. And we all know that classical musicians often find it difficult to remember that they are performers. They're on stage. They're there to perform totally with their whole body and with their instruments. They're not simply going through the notes, as it were. And with all the years that I worked with Complicité and all those Lecoq-trained actors, I often wish that classical musicians were given just one little masterclass about how to hold their bodies when they're on stage, how to walk on with joy and excitement at the very beginning, so that the audience knows, oh gee, these guys, they're going to tell us a story, and it's going to be wonderful, and it's going to be beautiful. And that's done at the very beginning, from the moment you walk off the wings onto the sacred space of the stage. You are performing already when you're sitting there in your chair. And even if you're just checking your music, that's a performance, because people are watching you.
And I know we've worked with a lot of orchestras, you and I together, Jared. And I would say, just like San Diego, the orchestra, the players are just so game for this in a way that I have not. We often kind of are at loggerheads with orchestras where we want to do something interesting with light or projections, and they're like, no, it's gonna mess me up, and blah blah blah. And maybe it's the sort of California ethos, so just like, yeah, man, that's cool, let's give that a shot. They're, I mean, incredibly talented group of musicians, and I'm just appreciative of their wanting to be those collaborators and being really game.
I'd also like to say, on another note, something about the fact that we had just such a wonderful team of actors, everybody friends with everybody and so experienced. But I particularly think of the fact that we had two of Chicago's most distinguished actors over many years, Jill Schellebarger and Roger Mueller, who happened to have been married. Well, I tease them and say they've been married for a century and a half, and their 3 children are nationally famous performers, all of them. And Roger and Jill were playing the 2 married couples, Theseus and Hippolyta, the earthly ones, and then Oberon and Titania, the fairy ones. And of course, Roger and Jill were playing themselves. They were playing decades of marriage, and that was another form. It was incredibly moving, and another form of comedy as well. And also the fact that they'd both done those roles so many times in their lives that the words are deep, deep, deep inside them. And they both love music. And as Roger said in a very moving speech afterwards, to be an actor all your life and then suddenly to have a great symphony orchestra with you is, he said, it just reduced him to tears to stand and do those words and then hear the music come in.
Well, the one thing I'll say is that talking to all of you again and revisiting that, it makes me really hungry to be able to do it again, and just reminds me that kind of connection that we formed for a relatively short amount of time. I feel it's something I'm going to carry for the rest of my life. I just know that, and I've been performing for more than 20 years, and so I know when it sticks, and this is one that sticks. So I'm grateful for those connections. For Jared and Mike and Rafael and Clement, like everybody that and all the actors that we've got to perform with that aren't on the Zoom call. It's a bond, and it's something that only live performance can really give, and that part of it, not only do I miss, but I look forward to it when we can do it again.
Absolutely. And I was when Clement sent the file again, that I could actually see it, because of course, being in the orchestra, I cannot really being able to really see the whole thing all together, and having them looking from outside, it's like, it's just wonderful. I put it to Ariadna, and it was crazy. My daughter, she's 4, and at the scale, so she went crazy and started drawing things, and it was like, okay, this is like an injection, and it's great that you could hear it still from the phone. You have that, and I remember this whole thing, and for sure it's going to stick, and we just have to create more things to do together, because there was a natural chemistry on it that it was great. It felt so natural and so great, and thanks goodness is that cannot be replaced with internet and everything.
And I think there is something also about this strange art form of melodrama from 200 years ago. It makes enormous demands on the orchestra, but the orchestra is right at the center. The orchestra is not in a pit. The orchestra itself and Mendelssohn's music and how the orchestra play it is the drama. And I absolutely endorse what Rafael and Jonathan have said about live performance. to bring an orchestra back to the live world, the live playing. An orchestra itself is a village, to make them realize how valuable it is, to make the audience and enter into it in the way that Mike was talking about, that the audience is as much responsible for the drama as the musicians and the actors, and Mike's beautiful projections and Amanda's lighting, and the whole thing is a single live experience. You could film something like this, but it wouldn't be the same.
Oh, that beautiful music right there at the end. It's just makes us long to hear more. I love when Mike Tutai, who, in case you can't tell, is in a cabin in Wisconsin doing all of this and editing work, including, I think he has solar panels for energy during this pandemic. But when he talks about the importance of the audience being a part of the experience, and we miss our audience so much, and I think it's so true. The energy you feel with an audience that is engaged is part of it, and we want it to be part of it. And that's also what this Listen Here has been about. You, our audience, hearing about our own, hearing about music, hearing about our orchestra, hearing from you, Rafael. We want you to feel close to us at this time and know how critical you are to this orchestra and also to the concert experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, it's concert without audience are not the same. We really need. I mean, it has to be all together. It becomes one thing when we are in there, and we miss very much the stage, at the same time our audience and the way they react to what we do and how we speak through music. So yeah.
Yeah, that really particularly rang true today. So we're going to take a little break from Listen Here for a few weeks. We will keep in touch. We'll continue to do things on Wednesday nights, and you can always follow us on YouTube, subscribe to YouTube, and follow us on Facebook. But when we were thinking back in this year, during the time you've been here, Rafael, since March, and we've been isolated, and we've thought about so many people who are taking care who are first line responders, who are essential workers, who are really out there when many of us are forced to be in isolation. You remembered the Notturno from this, and you had an idea, and it's touching, it's beautiful, and it's kind of how we want to leave you tonight. But the Notturno said to you, this is something we can do as an orchestra, even though we can't be together on stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, it was challenging. And here, of course, we have the help of William, which is our guy that makes all the Listen Here behind cameras. He helped us to put together this from our home, because I remember when we did it, it was at the very beginning of the pandemic. So even actually, many of us were not even going out for grocery shopping or anything. So it was very important, a way to give a little thank you to all of the frontline workers from our homes, trying to, I mean, we speak better with music. So I remember having this beautiful essence of the Nocturno coming into my head when we're talking about we need to say thank you to everybody. How can we do it? And then we put together this video that you will see in a little bit to just try to express how we feel, because the music itself is so dreamy and wonderful, and also have a lot of hope and light that is very much needed at the beginning of the pandemic, and now 5 months later as well. So it's still resonate very much in me. Yeah.
And Jared said it at the end, the magic of the Mendelssohn is that, and this production is that the music and the orchestra is at the center. And indeed, the orchestra is our center, surrounded by our audience, and we thank you so much for that. So we leave you for a little while. Be well, wear your masks so we can come back soon. And here's our tribute, the orchestra's tribute to those who are taking care of us. And we will see you when we return.
Yeah, stay safe.
Jack shall have Jill, naught shall go ill.
The man shall have his mare again, and all shall be well.
you.